Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, this is my review of the latest entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Widow. In addition to Scarlett Johansson, it stars Florence Pugh, David Harbour, Fagbenle, William Hurt, Rachel Weisz, Ray Winstone, and it is directed by Cate Shortland from a screenplay by Eric Pearson. Now, before I get too far into it, I'm just going to say off the top, I did enjoy this film. It is a long time coming, and I do agree it should have been made years ago, but since it's a prequel, I don't mind it. I was just wondering from the beginning, when is it going to be set? And of course, being set post-Civil War, it's like that's the most appropriate place, especially if we're going to have Black Widow be off by herself, mostly dealing with people from her past. Now, even with just seeing the initial trailer, the moment this film was announced, I was excited. Then La Rona came and postponed it. But having watched it, I would say it's a little bit worth the wait. But I do wish it had been made sooner, just in general, because for me, off the top, even though other than a couple minor issues and a little bit of the construction, I didn't mind Captain Marvel, but I will say this is the film Captain Marvel wishes it was, where it has a good female lead character, good supporting characters, but doesn't seem like it's being overly preachy in parts and pushing something. As I know people try to say that film is overly woke, but I really wouldn't say it's that woke. I'd say it's more based on what Bree said out of character, combined with a couple moments inside the film, like that scene where it's a montage of her standing up. It's like, I get what they're going for there, but it's like, a little bit on the nose there, aren't we? Here, nothing like that. Doesn't feel overly preachy. And while some might say it is just a standard MCU affair, which to a degree it is, but for the first and probably only solo outing for the character, it works. I think the main difference in construction, though, of course, is unlike Captain Marvel, where that was our first proper introduction to her other than the Easter egg. We already know Black Widow. We've seen her as a side character in her own one, so we didn't have to introduce her. This is more elaboration. Now, what I mean by that is that since it is set post-Civil War and Natasha's off by herself, she has to acclimate to not having to do it all that. First, she's just trying to put the past behind her and go, hey, I'm no longer an Avenger, I'm no longer active, trying to find a nice life. But since she is attacked for possessing something that she did not know she possessed because it was sent to her via mail. She's attacked by someone in a suit who, of course, is Taskmaster, character from the comics. She manages to get the vials that the guy Taskmaster was looking for, and she goes back to Budapest. So we finally get to see Budapest. No, we don't actually see what happened the first time. We just hear a little bit about it, but it's enough that we're like, yeah, we don't really need to see it now. It's probably better just to imagine what happened now that we know a little bit more about it than to actually see it. But if we saw it eventually, I wouldn't mind. Now, she is going to find Yelena, who is her sister. They're not biologically related, but they were raised together for a time, which that's the opening scene of the movie, where we see Natasha, Yelena, and their fake father, who is the Red Guardian, and their fake mother, who is another Black Widow from a previous generation, Melina, leave America and go back to Russia. And then we see them put into the Red Room, which I will say, from a music standpoint, that cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit, just the tone of it, I think definitely does work with the opening scene, and it definitely fits that montage. Obviously, Natasha finds Yelena in Budapest. They're attacked once again by Taskmaster. They get out of there, and they're thinking, well, we got to figure out what's going on. We got to do something, so we're going to have to get Dad out. Alexei, the Red Guardian, he's been in prison, and as we find out, he's actually been in prison since the end of their mission. And he's gained weight, which is the fact he is a super soldier in the mold of Captain America. Maybe not the same type of formula, but higher metabolism, higher strength. So in order to get fat like that, he's had to consume a lot of stuff. And of course, he's in prison, so he's got a lot of time. He's still very, very strong, as we see in the opening scene of him in prison, where he's arm wrestling with people, where he could let them beat them if he wanted, but seeing them do that, he's like, ah. Now, he claims to have fought Captain America at one point, which in the comics makes sense. But in the MCU, it's one of those things that even fans who don't like the character are scratching their head. But considering the whole time travel thing that Cap did to return the stones, combined with what happens at the end of the Loki show, I could see Alexei probably meeting the real Captain America at one point. Maybe in this new timeline, Steve did run into him in the 80s, being a little bit older but still having his figure. And they fought. Or it could be him jumping through time to return the stones, and he happened to run into Red Guardian on a mission to try to steal one of them. Red Guardian versus Captain America. And then Red Guardian's like, finally, a worthy adversary. Our battle shall be legendary. And of course, nobody believes him, because up until that point, Cap was still in the ice. And they all thought he was dead. And then, of course, he's been found years later. And he's like, oh, there he is. Which the action scenes in this movie are top notch. I mean, you saw computer generated. If you see some behind the scenes stuff, you see the green screen and all that. But that's how modern films are done. I'm not going to really harp on that. The special effects I thought were rendered pretty well. There's only really one moment where I have a complaint about, but I'll save that until I actually get to talk about Taskmaster proper. And the rest of the plot, once they get involved with Melina, is the family taking down the Red Room. Because as we find out, that protocol is still in place. And that's the one thing I really do love about this film, is that it elaborates more on the Red Room. Because before this, it was mentioned in passing. I believe the first time it was actually mentioned on film for this series was in Age of Ultron for Natasha's backstory, where she's talking with Hulk about it. The procedure, where they take her uterus out, turn her into a weapon. And she says she feels like a monster because of all that. Now, I know some are not a big fan of that plot. I don't mind them as a couple, but I do think it does kind of come out of nowhere. Now, with that whole thing, her saying she feels like a monster, someone say, oh, she feels like that because she can't have children. Not really. I think it's the whole thing that they took away her ability to procreate and then turned her into a weapon. And I think makes her feel like a monster. And as we see what happens with the newer generation of widows, they take away their free will completely. Definitely makes them feel like a monster. And then, of course, you combine with how Natasha escaped from the Red Room Protocol the first time, thinking she killed 2 people. And then we find out one of them survived from the beginning and the other one just wait. You can definitely see why she feels like a monster. Of course, Ray Winstone plays Dreykov, who is the head of the Red Room. He does a pretty good job playing a puppet master. And the way they fit him in there is like, yeah, he definitely could have been a behind-the-scenes one. It would not be the first time. I mean, the whole thing with Hydra being underground and all that does fit. So him being underground, in a way, in Russia would make sense. Especially him watching all this. He'd probably, like, whenever he'd see Natasha on the news, he'd be like, that's my girl. Watch her do this. Eventually she'll come back to me. Which is part of his plan in this film, to try to get an Avenger on his side, but doesn't really work, as you could probably guess, since this takes place between Civil War and the next 2 Avengers, so we know that it's all going to turn out in the end, which is probably the only part of a prequel that is like, eh. All I care about is that the story is good, and then it elaborates some more stuff, and here, elaborating on the Red Room Protocol, not really showing a lot of it, but through dialogue and all that, showing just how Dreykov and the others turned the girls into their weapons, where they found them, just how many of them there are. Definitely there. The whole family dynamic throughout the whole film, the 4 of them are trying to come to terms with them being an actual family. It's mostly between Elena, Natasha, and of course Alexei, their whole little thing. And that's where some of the humor of this film comes from, because it's not an MCU film without humor. And maybe it's me, but I think a lot of it works because of that family dynamic. I mean, Alexei, when he's reunited with the girls, he is kind of like that embarrassing dad who's trying to reconnect with his kids. Like when he's telling the story about surviving in winter with the urine on his hands to Yelena, you can tell she's like, what the? But you can tell he's trying. So it's one of those ones that, like, yeah, it's a bit awkward, but it's intentionally supposed to be that way. Alexei is trying to do his best. And of course, the whole posing joke, which was the first bit of humor I actually heard about before I saw the film. I thought it was going to be more prevalent, or the joke was going to be different. I thought it was going to be the little sister and constantly posing all the time, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound good. But then when I saw it, I'm like, I don't really see the issue. It's a typical younger sister ribbing an older sister joke, especially the first time it's used. It's like, what is with you, that pose you do with your fighting? You're such a poser. Then when they're breaking Alexei out, such a poser when she sees Natasha land. And then when she does it inadvertently, she's like, Yeesh. That's a natural reaction for me. I could see why it might not resonate with everybody, those jokes, but they work with me. Of course, Melina naming the pig after Alexei. And of course the dark thing we find about the pig that ties in with the Red Room protocols, like, oof, oof, oof. Of course, by the end of everything, the family do accept each other as family, so we are going to see Elena in future films as the mid-credit sequence shows, but it also is one of those things like, they're going to blame Cliff for it? Well, technically he did go with Natasha to collect the Soul Stone, so I could see why people who not know how that went down would probably blame him for her death, especially since they were involved with the whole Budapest thing, which I'm not really going to spoil that in this review, but just say it is brought up when they're escaping from Budapest, and just from what they imply in shows, like, that must have been an interesting little meeting between these two. And no wonder in Avengers he's like, you and I remember Budapest way differently. Now we come to Taskmaster. Now, I don't know much about Taskmaster in the comics, but from what I hear, they definitely changed the character for the film. It's kind of a Mandarin, Joker 89 type situation where physically it's there, but then when we get down to it, like, leans a little bit more towards Mandarin, because the whole Joker thing within the context of that film works, and it's just one thing. It's like, it's not super egregious, unless you're not a fan of the whole I made you, you made me thing. This is more like Mandarin, where you think you're getting one, then you get another. I'll say Mandarin, within the context of its film, definitely does work, even though now with the Ten Rings film we are going to get a more proper Mandarin. Played a little bit differently. Now, Taskmaster, just from what I've seen, I can understand why the fans of the comics are mad. Now, I did not look up what Taskmaster does in there, other than being, an agent-type character. So I can understand why they're mad about that. Along with the reveal, because that's the moment where the special effects did not look that good. They weren't like super obvious, like, oh, that's low budget, but you could tell compared to the rendering on other effects that they dropped the ball a little bit there. They along the edging and all that, and just the head shape is like, doesn't look as convincing. Now in other shots it looks a little bit more convincing, because I think in that moment they took out the double who was in the suit for most of the film, the stunt double, and just had the actress playing Taskmaster do it. Which, for those of you, this is going to be one spoiler. Taskmaster in this film is the daughter of the Raykov, who Natasha thought she killed when she assassinated him. But no, she survived, and like the rest of the widow, she is controlled by her father. But she also has that personal vendetta against Natasha for that, which is why I'll say that from a thematic standpoint, near the end, now Natasha has to face the personification of her past transgressions and regrets. And that is true. That's the thematic part of it. That's why I'm of two minds on it. I mean, we got that thing. It changes the thing from the comics, which I can understand why fans of the comics are mad, and I'm sorry about Odie barking like that. But that said, within the context of the film, what that was portrayed, I didn't mind it. It's just the execution of when we see it, yeah. And I know a lot of people are talking about how through the rest of the film it makes you think it's going to be a guy, but then when you see it, it's like, oh, it's a woman. It's like, the size thing, maybe not. This doesn't have to do with the height thing, because I met tall women, I've dated one. It has to do more with the proportions. Because even if a woman works out, unless they work out to the point where it's like, it doesn't really look that good, which I've only met in person one, I think that about. The proportions between male and women are going to be a little different. Just the body shape and all that. And throughout most of the film, with how Taskmaster is presented, you think it's a man. And then when you see that, it's like, So I can get why some of them are a little bit like that. However, I don't get that upset with it because it is an old Hollywood trick. Hitchcock even used it in Psycho. The difference, of course, there being in Psycho, you got all the shadows and different angles to where feasibly you could still think it is a woman. And Norman is not that large of a man, so it's a little bit easier. Whereas here, they make it look like it's an above average size man, and then you see that like, And then after that, they don't really, or maybe it was me, it doesn't seem like Taskmaster is portrayed as over the top and large as the character was shown early on, so there's that. Which is why I think they could have gotten a female stunt double or a smaller stunt double so that you don't notice it that much. Maybe I watch the film again, I might not notice it like that as well, because I already knew the twist going in, so maybe that's why I was looking like, yeah, maybe we could have done a different angle there. Who knows, maybe this could have also been a last-minute character decision, but the film, it doesn't really come off as that, where you're like, oh, that's last minute. Then again, some films that have reshoots and all that, you don't know about it. Like Empire Strikes Back doesn't come off as it had reshoots, and then when you find out, you're like, oh, I did not know that. Would never have guessed it. That's, of course, back in the day when films had reshoots, they didn't broadcast it all the time. That's one of the bad things about social media, especially nowadays, because whenever people hear that a film had reshoots, they're like, they automatically go, all the films have reshoots. That means the film production's in trouble. Oh my god, oh my god. It's like, a lot of films have reshoots. It's not the end of the world. Of course, Taskmaster. Like I said, I'm fine. I can understand why my comic book friends and other comic fans are not fine with it. I don't think it's a thing that you should really, hate the whole film over. It doesn't seem like it's that egregious. It was like, if anything, it comes off to me as like one thing to really not like about the film, but then the rest of it be like, alright. Probably would have been a little bit more interested to see a more comic accurate one, but like I said, within the context of the story, I didn't have any issues with it. Just the execution. And overall, that's really about it, all I have to say about the film. I mean, the ending scene does go into the two Avengers films, and then the mid-credit sequence ends by showing her grave and hinting Yelena's going to have a confrontation with Cliff, which is like, should be interesting. Fun film. Pace was pretty good. The action scenes were good. I didn't mind the humor because it stemmed from the family, which the family dynamic was very believable between all the characters. Costumes designs were pretty good, especially the whiter versions of the Black Widow outfits. The Red Guardian outfit was pretty good. And of course, with the whole quarantine thing, watching Red Guardian put on his outfit and like it still fits but barely. All that hit home with me as a cosplayer. That really hit home. Like, we're trying it on after losing it a little bit, and you're like, it still fits. It still fits. And of course, the more elaboration on the Red Room, definitely there. Like I said, it has something I can see some of my fellow friends and fans having issues with, but they didn't really bug me that much. Where would I put it amongst them? I'd probably put it in the towards the middle top if I were to rank all the films. Not one of my favorite ones, but not one of my least favorite ones. And I'd say it's a little bit above average. It's entertaining. The little bit of depth it has there is good. And definitely, like I said at the top of this, what Captain Marvel was trying to be and did fail at a little bit. And like I said earlier as well, I do wish they kind of made this film earlier. But who knows? We still might get another Natasha solo project. But if it is, it'll probably just be a one-off in one of the shows on Disney Plus or whatnot. But if this is the last big thing that we see the character of Natasha in, I'd say Scarlett Johansson went out on a win. Until next time, guys, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you do want to support the channel, we got the Patreon down below. You get some perks. You get to see some of the videos early. And you also get to do suggestions for later videos. If you just want to do one-off support or you want to do a one-off request, that PayPal link is also down there below.